Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, each one drifting as if the heavens themselves hesitated to let it touch the earth. The railway station, a clabbered skeleton against the pale sky, stood half swallowed by the blizzard. Its platform was deserted save for a single figure, thin and trembling, clutching her shawl tighter, as though that worn scrap could bar the cold. Isla Mayfield's boots were cracked, her cheeks raw with frostbite, and her eyes, hollow yet stubborn, searched every passerby for mercy. The townsfolk didn't look long. A few glanced, pity flickering like a match snuffed before it caught. Others smirked. A drunk laughed outright, his words slurred and cruel. "There's the barn rat. Too proud to wed, too poor to eat." Their voices clung to her like the wind, whispering reminders of shame she already carried deep inside. She stepped forward anyway, voice breaking as she offered what little she had left. "I'll sleep in the barn. Just give me work." Her words scattered like seeds across frozen ground. No one bent to pick them up. The men tightened their coats, the women pressed their children closer, and the doors to the mercantile and saloon opened only to swallow warmth away from her. Her hunger was louder than their scorn. It roared in her belly, clawed at her throat. Yet Isla kept her back straight, for she had learned long ago that when one bends too much, the world breaks you in two. Pride had no place in her, but dignity, thin as the hem of her tattered dress, was all she owned. Snow whirled harder. Lanterns along the street swayed and hissed in the wind. She lifted her voice again, desperate now, almost pleading. "I'll work for nothing. Just, don't send me away." Silence answered her. A silence sharper than words. Then a shadow shifted at the edge of the crowd. Broad, motionless, watching. He was taller than any man there, bare-chested beneath a draped buffalo hide, his skin burnished bronze against the pale snow. His hair fell long and dark, caught in the wind like black banners. An Apache, unmistakable. The weight of him drew every eye, yet he stood unmoved, his expression unreadable. Isla felt his gaze before she met it. It pressed upon her like heat against ice, steady and unyielding. She flinched, not from fear but from the strangeness of being seen at all. Her heart hammered as though it, too, wanted to flee into the snow. Whispers rose behind her. "That's Tejon Red Elk. Keeps to himself. Wild blood, dangerous." The murmurs grew meaner, hungry for scandal. Better she rot than go with him. Isla's shame burned hotter than the cold. She lowered her head, as if that might make her invisible, though the ache in her chest knew invisibility had never been hers. For too long she had been the spectacle, the cautionary tale, the girl left behind. Tejon moved then. Not hurriedly, not hesitantly, but with the heavy certainty of a man who never asked permission. Snow crunched under his boots as he crossed the distance between them. He said nothing. The town fell silent, the hush broken only by the hiss of falling flakes and the distant groan of the train engine cooling on the tracks. He stopped before her. Close enough that she could see the faint scars scored across his shoulders, the frost clinging to his hair, the stillness in his dark eyes. For a breath, she forgot the cold, forgot the crowd. Then he lifted one hand. A hand roughened by labor, strong enough to split stone. He offered it without word or explanation. The gesture stole the breath from her lungs. She wanted to shrink back, to ask what he meant, to beg him not to make her shame deeper by toying with her need. But the hand did not waver. It hung there, patient as stone, as if he had already decided she was worth the offering. The crowd stirred. Someone hissed, "Don't you dare." Another spat in the snow. The preacher, old Amos Clay, murmured something under his breath like a prayer too tired to rise. Isla's legs wavered. She thought of her father's voice, rough with whiskey and disappointment. "You'll never be wanted. Not by man, not by God." She thought of the barn doors she had hoped would close behind her, shielding her from wind though never from judgment. And she thought of this hand, this impossible hand, waiting. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she placed her palm against his. His warmth startled her. His strength steadied her. He closed his hand around hers, not harshly, but as if sealing a pact. Gasps erupted. "She's lost. He'll shame her. It's sin." Tejon did not glance at them. He turned, guiding her away from the platform, each step heavy and certain. She half stumbled beside him, not daring to look back, though the whispers clung to her ears like frostbite. Words that would follow her long after the snow melted. They passed the saloon, its windows glowing gold with laughter she would never enter. They passed the church, its bells silent under the storm. At the edge of town the buildings gave way to white fields and pines bowed with ice. The road stretched endless, yet the hand holding hers never loosened. The wind softened. Snowflakes landed gently now, dusting her lashes, catching in his hair. She studied him in stolen glances. The set of his jaw, the silence that seemed less emptiness and more a language she had yet to learn. Shame pressed on her, heavy, whispering she had gone too far, that she would never be welcome again. But beneath it stirred something else, small as a coal under ash, a wondering if perhaps being unwelcome was the first step toward belonging. The cabin came into view, half buried in snow at the edge of the woods. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, fragile as thread against the storm. He stopped at the threshold, finally releasing her hand. She swayed with the loss of it. Tehan pushed open the door. The glow of fire spilled out, rich with the smell of pine smoke and iron. He stepped aside, waiting. Not commanding, not forcing, but waiting. Isla hesitated. Behind her lay town, with its cruel whispers and closed doors. Before her, silence and unknown. Her heart pounded with the weight of choice. She crossed the threshold. Inside, warmth wrapped her, startling after the bite of snow. A single fire burned low, casting shadows across rough-hewn walls. A table scarred by years of use. A bedroll in the corner, folded with deliberate care. Everything simple, yet everything alive with presence. She clutched her shawl tighter, unsure where to stand, unsure what she had just stepped into. He closed the door with a thud that sealed the storm outside. Then, without word, he moved past her, laying wood upon the fire, coaxing it to life until sparks leapt bright, and the room glowed amber. Isla's chest ached. She wanted to thank him, to explain she had asked only for a barn, nothing more. But her voice withered before it reached her lips. Instead, she watched him, the silent giant who had plucked her from a crowd eager to cast stones. She watched the flames rise, licking the shadows, painting his scarred shoulders in gold. And she wondered, was she safe, or had she merely traded one cage for another? Outside, the wind howled louder, as though the town itself shouted its judgment across the fields. Inside, firelight flickered, her breath shivered, and her fate turned upon a man who had not spoken a single word. And when his eyes lifted at last, dark and unblinking, fixed on her across the glow, Isla felt a tremor of fear and hope entwined. For in that gaze she saw no pity, no scorn, only a question. A question she did not yet know how to answer. The fire cracked and spat, filling the small cabin with the scent of resin and smoke. Isla stood near the door, her damp shawl clutched around her shoulders, her heart still racing from the journey through town. She had expected the barn, expected straw, the bite of cold, a corner where she might curl unseen. Instead this man, Tehan, had opened his door and led her into warmth. The strangeness of it unnerved her more than the storm. He said nothing as he moved about the room, stacking logs with practiced care. His silence pressed heavier than words could. Isla shifted her weight from one worn boot to the other, the floorboards creaking beneath her, as though voicing the unease she could not speak. At last he gestured, a simple motion of his hand toward the chair by the hearth. She hesitated, pride warring with need, then lowered herself onto it. The heat stung her cheeks, and for the first time in days her fingers began to tingle with returning blood. She bit her lip to keep tears from spilling, tears that would expose how close she had been to breaking. Tehan crossed the cabin, lifted a clay pot from the shelf, and filled it with snow he scooped from just outside the door. He set it near the fire to melt. The action was ordinary, yet deliberate, and she found herself studying him as one studies a foreign language, trying to find meaning in gestures, cadence in the rhythm of his silence. She wanted to thank him. The words perched on her tongue but refused to fly. Perhaps she feared they would sound like begging, and she had begged enough in one day. So she sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap, letting the crackle of pine carry the conversation neither dared to start. Time passed slowly. The snow melted into water, the water into steam. He poured it into a tin cup, dropped in dried herbs from a pouch, and set it before her. The warmth seeped into her palms, into her chest. She sipped cautiously, the bitter taste grounding her more than any comfort food might. She glanced at him again, expecting his eyes to be elsewhere, but found him watching her with a stillness that unsettled and steadied all at once. Not a gaze of possession, nor of disdain, but one that seemed to weigh her presence as if deciding whether she belonged here. She lowered her eyes quickly, ashamed of the thought that perhaps she did not. The storm outside beat against the walls. The wind howled like voices calling through the night, gossip made of snow and ice. In her mind she could hear them. The jeers, the curses, the certainty that she had traded dignity for shelter. Shame pressed down, heavier than the storm. She wrapped her arms around herself and wished for invisibility. Tehan moved again, pulling a thick wool blanket from a trunk in the corner. He set it on the floor near the fire, spreading it with careful precision. A second motion followed, his palm pressing down firmly, as if to say this space is yours. Her throat tightened. She had asked for a barn. Straw. Shadows. A place to disappear. Instead, she was given the center of his home. It was too much. Her pride resisted, but her body, trembling with exhaustion, betrayed her. She lowered herself onto the blanket, curling her knees to her chest. The warmth from the hearth touched her face, and her eyes grew heavy despite the whirlwind of thoughts tearing at her. She could not understand him. Why he would risk the wrath of town, why he offered comfort to a stranger when others would not. But she knew that for tonight at least, she would not freeze. Her breath slowed. Sleep hovered near, but shame and fear kept it at bay. Each creak of the cabin startled her. Each gust of wind outside reminded her of the crowd, of Boone's cold stare, of Mrs. Pike's sharp tongue. "You'll ruin yourself," they had whispered. Perhaps they were right. She turned on her side, facing the fire. Across the room Tehan sat upon a low stool, knife in hand, shaving curls from a block of wood. The shavings fell like feathers to the floor, gathering at his feet. His eyes never left the carving, yet she felt his awareness of her like a tide, steady, inescapable. The figure began to take shape. The curve of wings, the suggestion of a bird in flight. Isla watched, mesmerized. Each cut of the blade was clean, patient, intentional. It was a language of its own, speaking of restraint, of purpose. And when at last he set the small bird on the table beside her blanket, her chest ached with something she could not name. A gift, or perhaps a sign. A reminder that even from rough wood, beauty could be coaxed with careful hands. She touched it gently, afraid she might break it, though it was stronger than it looked. Her lips parted with the beginnings of gratitude, but when she glanced up, he had already returned to carving another. Words felt unnecessary, swallowed by the fire's glow. The storm deepened. Hours passed. Shadows stretched across the walls. Her body finally yielded to exhaustion, and her eyes closed despite her efforts. She drifted between waking and dream. Her last memory, the faint scent of cedar, and the steady rhythm of his knife against wood. She woke once to the sound of boots on the porch. A voice outside, muffled by snow. "Red Elk, you harbor her, you'll answer for it." The words sent terror through her veins, snapping her fully awake. She held her breath, waiting. Tehan did not rise. He did not answer. The voice cursed, spat into the snow, and faded into the storm. He remained still, as though carved from stone, only the movement of his knife betraying life. Isla lay trembling under the blanket, shame battling relief. They would not leave them be. The town's judgment was not snow that melted come morning. It was iron, hammered into her skin. Yet she could not deny the strange steadiness in his silence, the way it held her panic at bay. When her eyes finally closed again, the storm still raging, she dreamed not of barns or shadows, but of firelight and carved birds. She awoke at dawn to quiet, the storm broken, light slanting through the frosted window. Her first sight was Tehan, still seated, carving in hand, as if the night had been nothing more than a watch he had willingly kept. The table beside her now held two birds, wings outstretched toward one another. Her breath caught. She reached for them, her fingers trembling. And in that moment, with the silence of morning pressing close, she realized the barn she had begged for was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous, the beginning of belonging. The snow had thinned by morning, leaving behind a world made fragile and white, as if the earth itself had paused to take a breath. Smoke rose from Tehan's chimney in a steady column, defying the stillness, carrying the scent of pine and survival into the crisp air. Inside, Isla moved quietly, brushing ash from the hearth, her shawl slipping down one shoulder. Each motion felt too large in the silence, as though the walls watched and remembered. Tehan stood near the window, sharpening his blade with slow, precise strokes. His presence filled the cabin, though he made no sound beyond the rasp of steel on stone. She glanced toward him only when she dared, yet even without looking she felt him. His steadiness, his silence, the gravity of being allowed in his space. She had been there 2 days now. 2 days of firelight, chores shared in awkward rhythm, meals eaten with more quiet than conversation. And though she slept curled on the blanket by the hearth, each night she woke with the sense that she was no longer merely surviving but being witnessed. That was what unsettled her most. When she stepped outside to fetch snow for water, the air cut her skin like glass. She drew her shawl tight, hurrying to the drift beside the porch. But voices carried on the wind, low, bitter, unmistakable. She froze, crouched by the snow pile. "Reckon she's in there still," one man muttered. "Red Elk's got her under his roof, same as a wife," another sneered. "Shame on them both. He'll ruin what's left of her name." Her breath quickened. She rose slowly, her bucket shaking in her hands. The men stood just beyond the treeline, 2 townsfolk she knew by sight if not by kindness. They spat into the snow, their eyes hard when they met hers. One tipped his hat mockingly. "Morning, barn rat." Heat rushed to her cheeks, though the air was freezing. She wanted to shout that she had begged only for work, that she had not chosen this scandal. But her voice shrank under the weight of their laughter. She hurried inside, slamming the door with more force than she meant. Tehan looked up. His gaze met hers, steady, unreadable. He did not ask what had been said. He did not need to. She set down the bucket with trembling hands, ashamed of her weakness. Shame seemed to grow heavier the longer she stayed here, as though she carried not only her own but his as well. By afternoon, the storm had fully cleared. The sun revealed a town restless with gossip. Isla learned it when she dared walk the path to the well, when Mrs. Eudora Pike's sharp voice pierced the air like a blade. "There she goes." Throwing herself at him. "Did you see her face?" No shame left. Other women nodded, their eyes raking over Isla with cruelty. Children, mimicking their mothers, pointed and giggled. Isla kept her head bowed, her jaw tight, her hands stiff on the bucket handle. Every step back toward the cabin felt like walking through fire. Inside, she collapsed against the wall, clutching the wooden bird Tehan had carved her. Her breath shook. All her life she had lived beneath judgment, but this was heavier. It was no longer just about her. His silence, his choice to keep her here, had bound their shames together. That evening, as the fire hissed low, Tehan placed another bird on the table beside her. This one smaller, wings outstretched. She touched it with trembling fingers. "They'll never stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They'll make you suffer for me." He did not answer. Instead, he moved to the hearth, adding wood to the flames. Sparks leapt, light dancing across his face. His silence was not ignorance, it was a refusal to bend. But she feared it would break them both. The next day brought a harsher reckoning. Deputy Silas Boone arrived, his boots stamping snow from the porch, his voice carrying authority sharpened by disdain. Isla stiffened when the door swung open, and his figure filled the cabin. He smelled of tobacco and judgment. "You harboring her here, Red Elk?" Boone demanded, his hand resting near his holster. "You think the law let this stand?" Tehan rose from his stool. He said nothing, but the set of his shoulders was answer enough. Boone's eyes narrowed. He turned to Isla, his words slicing her pride. "You'll ruin what's left of yourself, girl. You stay here, you're no better than." "Enough," Isla whispered, though her voice was thin. She trembled under Boone's stare, every cruel word pressing against her ribs. Her shame screamed at her to leave, to spare herself and spare Tehan. Yet when she looked at the carved birds on the table, something inside her shifted. She straightened, her voice clearer this time. I asked to sleep in a barn. He gave me fire. That is all. Boone's lip curled. Fire ain't free. He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. But Tehan moved between them, silent, immovable, his chest broad enough to block the deputy's sneer. For a moment the room held its breath. Boone's hand twitched near his gun, but he did not draw. Instead he spat on the floorboards, his contempt a final mark. This won't end quiet, he muttered, then turned and slammed the door behind him. The cabin seemed smaller after he left, the air thick with the echo of his threat. Isla sank onto the blanket, her hands shaking. Tehan returned to his stool, knife in hand, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. That night she could not sleep. Shame gnawed at her, but so too did something stranger, sharper, a stirring of defiance. She had spoken, however weakly, and the world had not ended. The fire burned steady, and across it sat a man who had chosen, without words, to stand between her and scorn. She studied him in the shifting glow, the scars across his shoulders, the patient rhythm of his carving. And for the first time, she wondered if perhaps silence could be stronger than speech, if perhaps dignity could be born not of acceptance but of resistance. Outside, the snow glistened under the moon, hiding the ashes of judgment beneath its veil. But morning would bring voices again. Morning would bring reckoning. Isla curled beneath the blanket, clutching the carved bird to her chest. She closed her eyes, though sleep would not come. She felt the storm gathering, not in the sky, but in the hearts of those who would not rest until she was broken. And when a fist pounded on the door just before dawn, she knew the storm had arrived. The pounding at the door rattled the cabin, shaking loose flakes of frost from the window ledge. Isla sat bolt upright, clutching the blanket to her chest, her breath sharp and quick. Tehan rose without hurry, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed readiness. He crossed the room in 2 strides and opened the door. Cold wind burst inside, carrying with it the growl of voices. Deputy Boone stood there, flanked by 3 men with rifles slung across their backs. Snow fell thick around them, catching on their beards, their eyes hard and accusing. You've had your chance, Red Elk, Boone barked. The town won't tolerate this any longer. She comes with us. Isla froze, the words striking her like stones. For a moment she saw herself already dragged into the snow, spit at, shamed until nothing of her remained. Her body trembled with the instinct to hide, but she knew there was nowhere left to hide. Tehan did not move aside. He stood solid in the doorway, the storm curling around him, his silence more defiant than any shout. Boone's sneer deepened. You think you can keep her? You think your kind has the right? His hand dropped toward his holster. The men behind him shifted, rifles glinting in the gray light. Isla's heart pounded, louder than the storm. She saw the weight of the moment, saw how easily blood could be spilled upon the snow. The thought made her stomach twist. All of this because she had asked for a barn. Because she had been too desperate to disappear. Her voice broke through before she could stop it. No. She stumbled forward, bare feet slapping the cold boards. The men looked at her as though she were already ruined. Boone's eyes narrowed with contempt. I asked for work, she said, her voice shaking but rising. I asked for a corner of straw. He gave me warmth when none of you would. That is my shame to carry, not his. The words poured from her like a dam bursting. For the first time she did not try to hide her trembling. She let them see it, let them see the truth of hunger, of cold, of being cast aside. He owes me nothing. Yet he gave me fire. You call it sin. I call it mercy. The men shifted uncomfortably, their boots crunching in the snow. Boone's jaw clenched, his pride struck. You think mercy will protect you? You'll be nothing but his whore. Isla flinched, but before the wound could settle, Tehan spoke. His voice was low, carved from stone, each word heavy with finality. She stays. The air thickened. Boone's hand tightened on his holster. For a breath the world seemed to teeter on the edge of violence. Isla's knees weakened, yet something inside her flared. the same ember that had sparked when she first touched the carved bird. She stepped closer to Tehon, her hand brushing his arm. She felt the muscle taut beneath his skin, the heat of his resolve. The contact steadied her. For the first time she did not feel like a burden. She felt like part of the stand. Boone's eyes darted between them, reading what neither had spoken. Rage twisted his face. "This isn't finished," he spat and turned sharply. The men followed, though not without glances back, uncertain, unsettled. Their footsteps crunched into the distance until the storm swallowed them whole. Tehon closed the door, sealing out the wind. The silence inside was immense, broken only by Isla's ragged breaths. She looked up at him, words trembling on her lips. "They'll come again." He did not answer, but the fire in his eyes told her he already knew. The rest of the day passed in weighted silence. Isla scrubbed the table though it was already clean, her hands restless, her thoughts heavier than stone. Outside, the storm grew fierce again, the sky closing in. She felt as if the whole world had turned against them. Yet in the heart of that storm, she realized something had shifted. Boone's words had not destroyed her. They had burned her, yes, but in the ashes something stubborn had survived. When evening fell, Tehon set his tools aside. He gestured for her to sit near the fire. She obeyed, settling onto the blanket. He knelt beside the hearth, feeding it wood until the flames leapt high, filling the cabin with light. For a long time he said nothing. Then, quietly, he slid another carving toward her. This one was unlike the others. A small figure with its arms folded across its chest, head bowed, yet carved with dignity in every line. She stared at it, her throat tightening. Her hand closed around the carving. Heat stung her eyes and tears fell freely, the first she had not fought. She whispered, voice trembling. "I thought I had nothing left." Tehon's gaze met hers across the flames. His silence carried more weight than any words. In it she felt recognition, not of her shame, but of her endurance. She drew the blanket tighter and let the firelight wash her. The storm outside raging while inside something fragile began to root. Later, when the wind roared loud enough to rattle the shutters, she found herself sitting closer to him. Their shoulders brushed once, twice, neither moving away. The warmth of him was startling, more than the fire, more than the blanket. For the first time in years she felt the edge of safety. But safety was fragile. The knock at the door returned, sharp, deliberate, louder than before. Isla's breath caught. She looked to Tehon, fear and defiance battling in her chest. He rose slowly, his hand brushing against hers as he passed. She clutched the carving to her chest, the fire crackling behind her, the storm pressing on all sides. The door loomed, and she knew with cold certainty that whatever stood beyond it would decide the shape of everything to come. The second knock was heavier than the first, rattling the frame as though the storm itself demanded entrance. Isla's breath caught, her hands gripping the carved figure so tightly the edges bit into her palm. The fire spat sparks, and shadows wavered on the walls. Tehon moved to the door without haste, his stillness like a mountain against the howling of both wind and men. When he opened it, the storm poured in, along with three figures framed by snow and fury. Boone stood in front, his coat flapping like the wings of a crow. Behind him, two men from town, faces grim, rifles in their arms. The night wrapped them in menace, but it was Boone's voice that cut sharpest. "You think silence can shield you?" He snarled. "This ends tonight. She's coming back with us. The town won't stand for her whoring in your cabin." The words struck Isla like stones hurled through glass. She pressed herself against the wall, her cheeks burning though the air was icy. The shame he spat was nothing new, but the violence behind it was. She could see it in their stances, in the way their boots sank deep into the snow. This was no visit of words alone. Tehon did not answer. He stepped into the doorway, broad shoulders filling the frame, the storm curling around him. His silence was not emptiness. It was resistance, refusal, a wall Boone could not breach without force. Boone's hand brushed his holster. "Step aside, Red Elk." The moment balanced like a blade. Isla's heart pounded against her ribs. Fear pressed heavy, but another voice inside her whispered, "No more running, no more bending." Her feet carried her forward before she could think. She stepped into the glow of firelight, her small figure just behind Taehan's. The wind stung her face, whipped her hair wild, but her voice, though trembling, rose above it. "I am not leaving." The words rang louder than she expected, carried by the storm itself. Boone's eyes snapped to hers, narrowing with disdain. "You think that changes what you are? A woman ruined, hiding behind a savage." Her breath shook, but she did not look away. "I asked only for a barn. None of you offered it. He gave me fire." Her voice broke, then steadied again. "And I will not step back into cold for the comfort of your gossip." For a flicker of a moment, Boone faltered. The men behind him shifted, uncertain, their eyes darting from her to Taehan's immovable frame. Yet pride, sharper than reason, hardened Boone's face. "Then you've chosen your shame," he spat, drawing his pistol. Time slowed. Isla's lungs seized. The gleam of metal caught the firelight, promising blood on snow. But Taehan moved with sudden force, his hand flashing out to shove Boone's arm skyward. The gun cracked, thunder swallowed by the storm, a bullet ripping harmlessly into night. The rifles behind Boone lifted, but Taehan's voice, low and fierce, cut through the chaos. "No more." It was the first word Isla had heard him speak at length, and it carried such weight that even the storm seemed to pause. The men froze, rattled by the depth of his tone, by the steadiness of his stance. Boone's face twisted with rage, but Isla saw fear flicker behind his eyes. She stepped closer to Taehan, her hand brushing his arm. Her voice rose again, stronger now. "You can call me ruined. You can call me worthless. But you will not call mercy sin." The words seemed to strike deeper than defiance. They were not a weapon, but a truth laid bare. Boone's jaw clenched, his pride unable to bend, yet he sensed the tide had shifted. His companions glanced at each other, their rifles lowering slightly. The storm howled around them, demanding retreat. Finally Boone spat into the snow, his fury bitter as bile. "This isn't over." He turned sharply, stalking into the storm, the men following though their steps lacked his certainty. Their shadows faded into the white, swallowed by night. Taehan closed the door. The cabin held its breath, silence pressing close after the chaos. Isla's knees weakened, and she sank onto the blanket by the hearth. Her hands still clutched the carving, now damp with sweat. She could not stop shaking. Taehan crouched beside her, his face calm but his eyes burning with something fierce, something she could not name. He reached out, his rough hand brushing the carving in her palm, steadying it. His silence spoke. "You are not alone in this." She wept then, not from fear but from release. The tears came hot and heavy, dropping onto the bird's wings. For so long she had believed herself unwanted, unseen. Tonight she had been defended not with words, but with presence, with action. The shame that had followed her like a shadow now seemed smaller, paling before the fire that burned steady beside her. When her sobs quieted, she looked at him, truly looked. The scars across his shoulders, the steadiness of his hands, the patience etched into his silence. And she knew the bond between them was no accident of storm or desperation. It was something forged in fire, tempered in judgment. The storm raged through the night, but inside they remained close to the hearth. Their shoulders brushed once, then again, neither moving away. When sleep finally claimed her, it was not the restless sleep of hunger or shame. It was heavy, grounding safe. She woke to light. The storm had broken, leaving behind a sky pale with dawn. Snow draped the world in silence, the air crisp with the promise of renewal. She sat up, blinking at the brightness spilling through the frosted glass. Taehan was already outside, the door left ajar, his breath rising in white clouds as he worked with hammer and wood. Isla pulled her shawl around her, and stepped into the cold. She watched, stunned, as he began framing an addition to the cabin, his movements steady and sure. She approached slowly. "What are you doing?" He paused, meeting her gaze. His eyes, dark and steady, held more than words could carry. He lifted one hand, brushing the new beam with his palm. "Room." The word was quiet, but it struck through her like thunder. Room. Not just shelter. Not just survival. Space for her life, her dignity, her belonging. She felt her chest ache, tears threatening again, but these were different. Soft, luminous, carrying not shame but something like hope. She moved closer, her hand finding the fresh wood. Her fingers pressed beside his, smaller, trembling, yet sure. The cold bit her skin, but the warmth between them was stronger. The dawn spread across the snow, turning it gold. The cabin stood like a sentinel, smoke curling steady into the sky. And for the first time, Isla felt the weight of judgment lift, replaced by something she had not dared to imagine. The beginning of home. She turned to him, her voice soft but unwavering. "I'll stay." He did not answer with words. He did not need to. The fire in his eyes, the quiet tilt of his head, the way his hand lingered against the beam, all of it told her what language could not. And as the sun climbed higher, casting light over the snow-swept world, Isla understood. The barn she had begged for had never been her salvation. It was here, beside him, in the fire that had been offered, in the silence that had protected, in the dawn that promised not just survival but a life worth living. Now, dear listener, take this with you. Mercy is not weakness, and dignity is not bestowed by the mouths of others. Sometimes it begins in snow, in silence, in the steady hand of one who sees you not as shame but as worth. Remember this. When the world hurls judgment, let fire answer, and let dawn rise beside you.